let's begin with the first thing on our agenda. And that is a very interesting panel discussion. And the title of it is India Inc. Readiness for ESG-led Growth and Profitability. India Inc. is at the cusp of a transformative journey towards ESG-led growth and profitability. And with an increasing recognition of the importance of ESG factors, Indian businesses are swiftly adapting to meeting evolving global standards. Companies are integrating sustainable practices into their core strategies, realizing the immense potential of both financial and reputational gains. This shift signifies a departure from traditional business models towards a more holistic approach that prioritizes long-term value creation for all stakeholders. And before we begin, I would like to take a moment to introduce our esteemed panelists and would request them to please come on stage once we finish setting this up. We have Mr. Nishant Gupta, Head Sustainability Flipkart Group. We have Ms. Aruna Newton, Associate Vice President and Head Global Diversity and Inclusion, Sustainability Reporting and Governance, Infosys Limited. We have Mr. Ankit Todi, Lead Sustainable Strategy and Partnerships, Mahindra Group. We have Ms. Richa Gautam, Sustainability and CSR Leader, Schneider Electric. We have Mr. Gaurav Swaroop, Director, ESG, Carbon and Social Performance and Vedanta Resources Limited. And to moderate this session, we have Ms. Preeta Misra, Senior Director, Credibility and Business Insights Group, ESG and SME, Dun & Bradstreet, India. Welcome all of you to please come on stage and give us your insights on this pertinent topic. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
So the first session, I've already spoken a lot, so I'll leave it to the panelists, but I can't not mention that, can you get a better diverse panel, right? Just look at the number alternately, right? I think it's a great start to an ESG and especially on diversity, right? So I think it's well structured, Naina. I think we have perfect balance out here, and we couldn't have expected a better panel, right? These are the companies which are driving the ESG transformation in the country. And many of them have been doing it before SEBI made the disclosures mandatory, driven maybe by the investors, but they have been doing it much more than what is required, and I'm sure beyond the tick marks, I think, with the passion. And I can see that when I was speaking with all of them, they believe in it, and they're driving the investor community to also believe in it rather than beyond the ROI. So I think it's really, really good, and thank you all of you. And let me jump directly into the questions now. So starting with Nishant. Nishant, Flipkart, of course, has been doing a lot of sustainability initiatives. How have you integrated ESG as a part of your growth strategy and also profitability?
So thanks. Good afternoon or good morning. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Just quickly summarizing how our journey has been. It has been the way we started a few years ago was more on the lines of what are our stakeholder expectations from us as an organization, right? And when I say stakeholders, it includes the employees, it includes the customers, it includes the suppliers that we work with, the brands that we work with, the policy, regulatory ecosystem, and everyone, what is being expected from us as an organization to deliver on that, right? And broadly, there were themes emerging from them to say that, okay, environmental sustainability, people do expect us to, for example, and I'm just taking a few examples to say that we are an industry where waste becomes relatively higher. So plastic or waste becomes one significant responsibility for the industry and therefore for the Flipkart to work on, right? Similarly, human rights in supply chains becomes another expectations that people have from us. Air quality becomes another key expectations that stakeholders have from us. So once we did that understanding or assessment to figure out what are our stakeholders expecting from us, and to be honest, employees were a significant part of that exercise, right? And it was also good to see that all of them, or more or less all of them, were overlapping with each other. So it became very crystal clear as to what we must act on and where we have a right to make a difference. Like you can work on a lot of issues, but where can we as an organization and in an industry make a meaningful difference in that aspect is how we figured as to what needs to be done, or what are the topics of materiality that you need to work on. And once you have that, then you go about setting the guardrails of measurement and then reporting and all of that. And we are also very happy to see the external ecosystem evolving to make sure that it is no longer, more often than not, it is no longer a conversation of cost economics as much as it used to be 5 years ago, right? So more and more solutions which are cost effective and also sustainable are coming out in the market. And that makes the job of people on this dais a little more easier than what it used to be 5-7 years ago, when you had to take a choice between the two aspects.
Thank you. I think you made a very interesting point, right? I think choosing the parameters where you make a difference. They may be critical, they may not be all critical factors, but those are the ones that you make a difference, and focusing on that creates an impact also on the ecosystem. Thank you. Moving on to Ankit, in Mahindra also we've seen it's been a pioneer in different kinds of sustainability practices. So if you can explain how this sustainably fits into business strategies, right? And how do you make it into an ESG culture among the employees? How do you drive that?
Thank you for having me here. So when I speak on behalf of the Mahindra Group, I'm actually representing a fairly diverse set of industries. So 6 listed companies, about 20 different industries. And when you have to work with such diversity, both in India and globally, there are lots of factors that you need to take into account. So Mahindra, when it comes to sort of focusing on ESG, started releasing its sustainability report way back in 2007, when it was exactly not mandatory to do that. And we have sort of transversed that journey. The core philosophy of the group is that purpose drives profits. And especially in the last couple of years, there has been an active interest that how do you make ESG a value accretive part of the business. So specifically, how do you transform the core nature of the businesses that you operate in into green businesses? That's one philosophy. So to give you a very tangible examples, the auto industry moving to EVs, the real estate industry in the Mahindra Group moving to making green buildings, the logistics industry talking about electric-based deliveries, the holidays portfolio, which is the entire resorts, they are now converting their resorts into green resorts. So one is how do you transform the core nature of your business into being more ESG and environment friendly, providing the right kind of services. That's one. And second, how do you additionally create value for the group by focusing on ESG? So there again, the second thing that I'll, a tangible example pick is the kind of impact investors that we have been attracting. So as a group over the last 2 years, we have got a total of about $400 million investments from 3 major international investors. All of these have been impact investors, and a large reason for why they are interested in partnering with the Mahindra Group is because of our ESG credentials in a big way. So I think that's the 2 things. And the third thing is how do we get more leadership involved into the entire conversation. So when it comes to ESG and sustainability, currently we have our group MD who chairs our sustainability council, and he regularly spends time every month to do this. So when you have the top leadership aligned on this topic and spending time regularly, that's when you are able to drive that culture across the organization. So I'll pause with that.
Yeah, I think very interesting. One of the questions when we talk about ESG is with any company for whom it's not mandatory, let's say, mandatory sometimes could be just a tick mark, right? Is that what will I get out of it? And I don't think that has stopped being asked. And you are able to quantify it to some extent, saying you've got so much of money because there are impact investors who are looking at it. But for that, you didn't start the journey. No, you've started it, and that's why you're getting it. So the journey needs to start. It can't be that I have money, they're willing to invest. Now let me, because ESG is not something that can be done. So I think that's a very interesting perspective. Richa, going to you on the same, right? Looking at the culture, right? Schneider Electric, large. I mean, we were talking before this, a lot of awards, etc. How do you drive it within? The customers may ask for it, investors may, but how do you drive it within the employee system, right? And build a culture which believes in sustainability.
Sure. Thanks, Preeta. Thank you for having me here. So Schneider is an electrical automation and energy management company. When we say energy management, we clearly believe that the way energy is produced and the way energy is used is the biggest vector for decarbonization. And you would all agree with me here. So we are right now at the very right stage, place, playing a very important role of a catalyst for driving decarbonization, not just for our operations, but also for our customers, also for our suppliers for that matter. So when I call upon the offerings that we have, the kind of products that are being made from the house of Schneider, the solutions, the tailor-made solutions that are being offered from our end, they have sustainability elements ingrained into it, starting from the design stage till the end use. So the complete life cycle of that product or a solution that we sell to the customer, we ingrain those elements of sustainability. So that's how we are accelerating progress, not just for us, but for all. And sustainability is a growth accretive business for us, like what Ankit also mentioned. So this has been the strategy and sustainability alliance along with growth pathways. And when you talk about culture, so now when we are selling something, when we are proposing something as a business proposition coming from Schneider, we need to speak the same language, not just us, our customers, our suppliers, and even our employees. So what we have done, and here we have an employee base of 1.5 lakhs in a global scenario. So what we have done, we have created a sustainability school where there are defined courses, defined material created by climate scientists, and this is what we have deployed for our entire employee base, so that everybody has a clear understanding of what sustainability is, and they speak the same language. And that has really brought about a wave of change where everybody's mindsets are aligned when it comes to sustainability. So this has worked well for us.
Thank you, Richa. I think really interesting. And once we ask the first set of questions, we'll take a pause for 5 minutes if there are any questions from the audience, because I think it's a fabulous opportunity to ask the panelists about what they're doing and learn from them. Moving forward, let me come to Aruna. Aruna, Infosys has been in the forefront for all the new, whether it be corporate governance and of course on ESG too. And focusing a little on E, while you cover a little bit about your ESG philosophy, and I know you've been very passionate about ESG, but looking at E, right, how do you define and measure the progress towards energy transition and the decarbonization goals?
Hello, Mumbai. ESG has become something of the subject of rock concerts. Today when we speak about ESG, there's always a full house, and that's good news. So thank you very much. Thank you, DNB. Thank you, Preeta, for having me here. I'd just like to go back. When the company was founded in 1981, Mr. Murthy set for us a vision, which simply read, "We will continue to earn the respect of our stakeholders." And we've had no reason to change this vision statement. And the idea of earning respect from every stakeholder, and Ankit mentioned the stakeholders in his response, is all about doing business responsibly. So I think the first piece is around creating the ethos of responsible business. ESG in that way is kind of baked into that ethos. So if you go back in 1996, we set up a formal foundation to work with the community. Another way of looking at how can growth be replicated and amplified beyond our boundaries. Yeah? The 2% profit after tax. So all of that came well before regulation. But in 2009, I think it was, Chris Gopalakrishnan, one of our co-founders, became the chair of the United Nations Global Compact. And in his role in the UNGC, he made a commitment. And he said Infosys will become carbon neutral in 2020. Everybody cheered and he came back. We looked at each other and said, what does it mean? We were sent off. We were sent off on a vacation to travel across India and to study monuments, palaces, old structures, places of worship, to understand what allowed these buildings to continue to maintain ambient conditions irrespective of the change in weather or the climatic conditions in which they were set up. Remember, there was no modern air conditioning, no technology, etc. And every one of these buildings, every one of us might have visited at some time in our lives, continue to remain very close to our heart, for various reasons. Now, I'm telling you this story because when we decided to become carbon neutral, of course, critics stood up and said, what does an IT services company have to do with carbon neutrality? Why would you even have a goal like that? How stupid is that? But I think today, everyone recognizes, so the WRI actually published stats which says GHG, 40% of GHG emissions come from the built environment. And the built environment actually consumes 30% of the global final energy use. A company like Infosys needs the built environment. You can't be sitting under the tree. I mean, we'd love to sit under the tree and be really flexible with our computers, etc. But you need electricity to run. Run your machines. If there is no electricity, you can't run your business at all. Technology requires electricity. And so when he spoke about the neutrality mission, today when I look back with great pride, we achieved this goal 30 years ahead of the timeline set by the Paris Agreement. The United Nations gave us what's called the Global Climate Action Award. And they celebrated the three-dimensional approach that we took. We said first we will reduce our per capita electricity consumption by 50% from the baseline of 2010. Just to give you a sense of the math, we grew during that period about 166% in terms of employee strength. But our electricity bills only went up 20%. To give you a sense of the kind of innovation that went into building design itself, right from building width, materials, orientation, blah, blah. Today we have more than 30 million square feet of LEED Platinum certified / Kriha 5-star certified office space. And we decided from that day on that we will not build anything that is not LEED Platinum certified. The second pillar that we adopted, of course, in a very visionary fashion, we said we're going to go to 100% renewables. At that time, the climate in India was not necessarily favorable to the adoption of renewables at such a large scale. In fact, when we made this commitment, we had ESCOMs filing lawsuits against Infosys, saying, these guys are supposed to be doing computers and software. What are they doing about electricity generation? They're taking away our jobs. We actually set up a 60 megawatt solar plant in Misra. There was a lot around creating regulation. There's a lot around informing policy. There's a lot about putting a stake in the ground to actually help people appreciate that there is value in that. Unlike other countries, we had to actually set up a landscape that would allow us to make these investments. We are not an electricity generation company. We own more than 60 megawatts of solar PV. Just for your information. We wanted to do 100%, but we kind of scaled it down because we recognize that, moving to renewables is a very, very federated subject. You can stand in New Delhi and keep screaming till the cows come home, but if the states don't follow suit, you will not be able to move it as fast as you would like to. But the third pillar, which really warmed my heart, was we recognize that beyond the scope 1 and scope 2, there is actually a large tail of scope 3 emissions that all of us struggle with. And the truth is 65% of an organization's emissions are in scope 3. You can keep doing everything between, around your campus and within the 4 walls, but your supply chains, your transport, travel emissions, etc. are huge. We decided instead of purchasing carbon credits that we would invest that money in projects that had a social development ethos. And we set up these projects way back in 2014-15 because, they have a gestation period. Of course, they're all gold standard projects, etc., recognized projects. And we actually got carbon credits from these investments. So it required this gestation, this setup. Today, more than 200,000 families benefit from Infosys' carbon offset projects. It creates rural jobs, it addresses 11 of the 17 SDGs, etc. So I think it's the approach that we actually took that allowed us to address this fully. And obviously, when we achieved carbon neutrality in 2020, we said, what next? And the board immediately said, we will set up the ESG committee of the board. We will now administer this beyond just a department to look at the way we actually run business. And we will be carbon neutral each year going forward. Of course, there's a huge push. We are also among the first companies that got the below 2 degree certification for the SBTi goals. And of course, there's an opportunity, now of course, below 2 degrees is not available. It's now below 1.5 degrees. And you're right, Preeta, in your observation that the world is not doing a very good job on this. Yeah. So I think it's beyond regulation. It's beyond what somebody's asking you. It's beyond what the investor is telling you to do. But I think the ability to look at responsible business with a wide angle lens, I think that's key to building sustainable business.
Thank you, Aruna. I think you've put it beautifully. And it's so true, right? Like when we also talk to customers and companies, there has to be passion at the top. The vision, that everybody follows, and not as a tick mark, not because I'll earn a lot of money out of it, but responsible behavior of the corporate, right? And if you look at it, you've also articulated well that in the long term, see, look at the time that Infosys did it, much before anybody asked for it, etc., right? It's actually giving you good ROI. If you want to actually measure it, right? I think, when we talk to company, they said, we want to earn carbon credits. I put up a solar plant. Now tell me. That's not the approach to earning carbon credits, right? So I think we have a long journey to go. I think if we look at quick fixes, and ESG is certainly not, a quick fix. I think approach at the top and then driving, measuring, monitoring and measuring becomes very critical. So thank you, Aruna. Now moving on to Gaurav again, while, you look at, of course, carbon and social performance, but also, going to ask you about the energy transition. How are you looking at it at Vedanta? But also what has been your philosophy, right, at ESG per se, and then getting into the energy transition.
Thank you, Preeta, and good morning to everybody. Good to be back in Bombay. I'm a Bombayite staying in Delhi, so it's always a welcome change. This is a very interesting conversation, and you have a very diverse panel of industries. Each, what I'm starting to notice is there are a lot of similarities in how we are structuring the problem, right? But every industry has its peculiarity. When it comes to Vedanta, and we're a metals and mining company, one of the largest in the country. We have zinc, aluminium, copper, steel, oil and gas. So a very, very diverse and a sector with many hard-to-abate industries defined within it. One of the things that the way Vedanta has been going about thinking on this, and we've had a 10-year journey on this, right? We started in 2009 or 10, and we've used almost a decade to build out our standards and our governance practices, etc. But in 2021, what we realized was that while we've got the foundation, right, where is the ambition? Where is the performance? Are we seeing a step change, or are we just kind of doing a reporting and audit kind of process? And we realized there was a need to step up, and we brought the entire company together, and we under a program called Transforming for Good, which has eventually now become the overall vision statement for Vedanta. And under the Transforming for Good banner, we looked at all areas of sustainability and ESG, right? So we know that we impact communities, we know we have an impact on the planet, and we know that the workplace needs to transform itself in order to deliver on those other two commitments, right? So transforming the workplace, transforming the planet, and transforming communities became the mantra for Vedanta. And under each of those three pillars, we took 9 aims, right? And 9 aims are very, very ambitious and broad-based. For the purpose of this particular discussion, I'll talk about aim for, which is our decarbonization aim. Right? But before that, also, I want to give you a little bit of sense about the scale of what we're talking about. Like I said, we have a very diverse set of industries, and when I look at my overall energy footprint, I'm looking at about 8 to 10 gigawatts of thermal power that we use, primarily in our aluminium smelters. And when I look at a decarbonization journey, when I want, so Vedanta's taken a target to become net zero by 2050 or sooner in some of our industries. And when I take that target and then I look at these mountain that I need to climb, there's a huge journey that needs to be traveled. And of course, this journey, that one statement on paper is easy enough to put down, but to get the buy-in from the stakeholders internally, and this is a very sexy statement, right? Our investors love it, our customers would love it, employees would love it, but how do you get the buy-in for it? How do you ensure that your management teams who have been running running their power processes on thermal power buy into a transition from 8 to 9 gigawatts of thermal to 8 to 9 gigawatts of renewable? So that was the ambition and journey that we were talking about. So we kind of broke this down into multiple parts, and I think this is pretty standard across, right? We said, all right, majority of this transition is going to come from renewables, and let's create a renewable deployment strategy. A lot of this, there are 3 other levers that we will have to use: energy efficiency, fuel switch, and despite all of this, we will have residual emissions, and so there has to be a carbon offset strategy at the end of the day. So we used all of these 4 levers, and we have a roadmap that we have developed on all of these things. What's really, really important here is we've looked at it from the standpoint, when we speak to our CEOs, when we speak to our energy managers in the room, there is a long-term target, but there are also interim targets that we have to meet, right? So in the very short term, 2025, all of our businesses are looking to reduce their GHG intensity by 20% from a 2021 baseline, right? Fairly ambitious, and we are pretty confident we'll get there. But intensity is not the game. The game is absolute emission reduction. And if we want to get to net zero, how do we make sure we are realizing the aim? So there are interim targets for 2030 where we are aiming to reduce our footprint by 25% from, again, an absolute energy footprint from thermal power plants at the scale of 10 gigawatts by 2030, right? And we've not yet seen expansion. So in the next couple of years, our footprint is actually going to go up. And we're expecting peak emissions around 2027. So what that means is that we have to start thinking a lot about what technologies to deploy, what are the financial feasibilities of these solutions because they're at scale, but most importantly, what is the reliability of it, right? So it's easy to say I'm going to deploy renewable. Renewable deployment at this scale has never been done. And we are actually seeing this time period between 2025 and 2030 as the time period where we will start to really realize what this means when the brass tacks hit the ground, right? So our ambition is to get to 2.5 gigawatts of round-the-clock renewable by 2030. That means nearly 10 gigawatts of installed capacity. We have plans in place for about 835 megawatts of RE-RTC that will come online next year. And that's why I'm saying 2025 to 2030 is really when we learn how do we make this transition happen. If it works, then the world is our oyster. If it does not work or if it's inconsistent, then we'll have to see what's next. But I think from a company perspective, and from an ESG professional perspective, it's really heartening to see that the scale and ambition has been accepted. It's been driven right from the top, but the consultative processes have been bottom up. So, we've got this very sweet spot that we hit, and, things keep oscillating between, I have to bring my costs down, forget renewables. do we have to get our ESG targets together? And that's the fun of it. But I think the fact that some of the largest companies in India are on similar journeys, I think bodes very, very well.
I think again a very interesting perspective, Gaurav, and it's an iterative process, right? All goals are ambitious because and those are the ones which anyway capture the headlines, right? And behind that, it's the people like you and your team which actually monitor it at a grassroots level, because how do you implement it? And I think this is what many governments don't have. That's why you set up ambitious targets, but you're not able to meet it. So I think it's really interesting to know. And also what I understand from you, what you're doing, right? I mean, you cannot continue to do the business exactly the same way. So the basics need to change. If you want to reduce your emissions, right? If you continue exactly the same way, you're not going to make that difference at all. So even, I was looking at Indian Railways, I think, they have come out with a target of 2030. They want to be net zero. And look at the number of people. So I think ambitious targets are the need, but then monitoring that, that you all are speaking about.
Use the Indian Railways example to convince our management. If they can do it, why can't we do it?
No, that's really interesting. So before I go to the next round of questions, if there anything that you would like to ask the panelists?
Thank you for the opportunity. Two questions, one to the Infosys lady and the other one to the Mahindra group person. Mahindra is doing a lot of work in EV vehicles. Yeah. Now, EV charging is done in the cities and the EV pollution obviously comes down in the city. But actually, the electricity is being generated somewhere else, and majority of that is from thermal. Now, government obviously wanted to reduce all this, but I think recently the power minister said that the peak load capacity is not in a position to be serviced by the renewable energy. So that's why you saw this BHEL stock going through the roof, because they have got a lot of big orders in thermal. So EV, asking for subsidy and even the two-wheelers asking for subsidy, I think the focus should be on renewable energy rather than EV. So comments from you. And as far as Infosys is concerned, my concern is, you talked good things about what Infosys did, but in the 2 years of pandemic, there was work from home culture which got developed, and the productivity was adequate and good enough. But then suddenly this moonlighting, stuff came, that people are actually doing a lot of other work, and so you're insisting that employees come to office. So if they come to office, they are going to use fuel, transport, etc., etc. And so, where does the ESG, broad strategy stand? Thank you very much.
Sure. Let me, firstly, thank you for asking that question. Is it working? Yeah. So firstly, thank you for asking that question. I think very interesting. So let me share specific data to answer your question. A typical ICE vehicle, a petrol diesel vehicle, over its entire lifetime emits about 35 tons of emission. When you go to an electric vehicle, similar build, similar power capacity, etc., in the current grid condition in India, which is roughly 77% thermal part, 23% renewable part. That's the current condition as of today. There, your emission footprint for the same vehicle would be about 20% lesser. It's not completely green, it's only 20% lesser. The moment you go to a grid which is completely green part, or you, let's say, solve for the charging infrastructure which is green part, then you can reduce it by about 80 to 85%. So that's the data there. Now coming to the second part of your question, again, the grid of the country going green, there are two ways in which you can reduce EV emissions. One is that you solve specifically for the EV charging infrastructure having green part. That's something that a lot of companies are doing. I won't take names, but some of the largest users of EV in the commercial segment, they are now trying to build infrastructure. We don't build charging infrastructure, but the ones who are building, they are trying to solve for that specific element, that how do you ensure at least the power used for EV charging is green. That's one part. The second part is that the grid as a whole needs to go green, because we also realize that 80% of the people actually charge at homes. So commercial use cases may be different, but most passenger vehicles, individual use will be charged at home. So there again, and this is not something we can completely control, but we can definitely influence. So in that regard, the country's goal are to get to about 50%. And at the same time, even at Mahindra, one of the main reasons why we continue to have a big renewable energy business is to push that. So I don't know if that's common knowledge, but Mahindra has one of the largest renewable energy companies called Mahindra Sustain, both at large scale IPP. So they have been adding green power to the grid, mainly for the government, and at the same time we have a number of other renewable energy businesses now moving from only solar to even hybrid. So that's our attempt at doing that, but at the end of the day this is something that will be a ecosystem play. So to that regard, I'll add one final point, is that how do you ensure that the country's ecosystem moves towards a green. So as as recent as last week, we partnered with the Ministry of Urban Affairs to launch something called the Net Zero Building Initiative, which is focused on energy efficiency at the countrywide level. Now, these are also attempts at if you are able to decrease the demand for the country as a whole on energy. And Aruna made this very interesting point that 40% of the building emissions or 40% of the energy use is from buildings. So by reducing your demand also, you will be able to accelerate the green energy in the ecosystem. So I think these are some attempts in which we are trying to address that.
If you read newspaper reports, Infosys is among the only companies that hasn't mandated return to office. Are you aware of that? We're continuing to endorse the hybrid model. On a lighter note, I think if you're reading the newspapers, you will see there's a water crisis in Bangalore. Yeah, all we need to do is bring 45,000 people back to campus. It'll be a desert. So I think we have to play this with a lot of caution. It's not just the emissions. But you're right. It comes at a price. So it's not just moonlighting. Today, actually, large organizations with a number of massive campuses also a source of work, secondary work. So there are many catering organizations, transportation, a whole host, an ecosystem of jobs get disrupted. Yeah, and so the government also puts a huge amount of pressure to say, come back and the ecosystem up again. Just for your information. So it's a bunch of forces, not only restricted to how efficiently work gets done. And of course, we have to, you can't insure against somebody moonlighting. But of course, you can have policies, you can have practices that are a little more stringent. Sometimes you have to punish 100% of people for the error of 0.01%. But I guess that's the nature of the problem. We haven't yet mandated return to work. And I'm not saying we're not going to do it. We may not do it, but we don't have a timeline in mind, unlike the other companies. We are also looking at the challenge of bringing such a large workforce back, 320,000 people worldwide. You want to be careful about how you phase them back and do it in a manner that's sensitive. I hope hybrid continues to define work models and flexibilities, because it also invites the participation of a diverse talent pool.
We were discussing about that, and I think good that he brought up that question. We'll take this last question, and then I have a set of questions for the panel before we end. Yes. One question.
Their question is to the basically the panelists. See, one of the main kind of a challenge is on the stakeholders communication and stakeholders engagement, especially in the process of ESG governance. See, most of the time, what has happened, the diversity or the complexity of the persons involved poses a lot of challenge in terms of communication, and the trust and transparency concerns are also getting involved. So how, as an organization, you are all there in a bigger organization, so how you'll be able to guide the smaller organization to ensure those challenges are mitigated, especially with regard to there is no universal unified standards which can advocate that this is the way it has to be. Even though we have a BRSR report currently which is being there in with the recent kind of introduction, but each one has got their own way of trying to either way to not as such as a compliance part of it, by forcefully wanted to dress up the data. So am I right in saying that? So most of the organization I've seen that the thing is, it is not the governance which is being done for my own sake, with realizing the objective of it, but for the sake of somebody has brought in a legislation, so a kind of a force is existing upon that. So that is what my kind of, in our organization, we are able to see that. What is your view, sir?
Gaurav, would you like to take it and then maybe Richa?
So just so that I understand your question is how are we engaging with stakeholders?
Yes. Especially if you have a trust and transparency concern, diversity and complexity among the stakeholders. So how do you be able to address those kind of a different stakeholders?
So I think, look, when we look at this challenge and we understand that every stakeholder has a different need, whether it's of information, whether it's of the kind of communication they're able to receive. I think one thing that sustainability professionals would not be guilty of is to try and adhering to compliance per se, right? Because we've always been ahead of compliance. Compliance has come back. Most of the companies on the panel here have been either working on sustainability disclosures for more than a decade before any of this became law. We are very mindful when I look at my major stakeholders, right? Our major stakeholders externally are our investors and regulators and communities. Investors and regulators require very, very specific detailed information for which your BRSR or your sustainability report or your TCFD report, they suffice, and you have to ensure that you provide them with that kind of information. I would be initially we used to mistake that every stakeholder reads my sustainability report. I think we've learned that over time, it's the investor and the regulator who's reading it. Some customers are reading it, right? But beyond that, the audience for this kind of reporting is limited. When it comes to my community and my customer, the approach has to be very, very different. What is the community interested in? They're interested in ensuring that if there is harm being caused, that harm is minimized or negated. Transparent communication channels are maintained between community members and the company. And there is enough benefit sharing happening, right? Whether it is through jobs, whether it is through CSR, etc. So that kind of mindful breaking down of the problem is something that we are teaching our management to do and think about, right? So that when a community member approaches them, it's not just a CSR orientation that they respond with. There are multiple other orientations that we have to be mindful of. And that process evolves over time, right? And that becomes as much a framework problem as it's a human relationship problem, right? And so maintaining transparency there, maintaining standard systems there, ensuring that there is a win-win scenario being built for those community members becomes very important. And then finally, you come to the other stakeholder, which is customers. Customers, come with their own demands, come with their own requirements. They're also driven by their own stakeholders who might be regulators and their end consumers, right? And so the idea is to keep listening, keep evolving, and then circling it back. So to help all of that, committees that we form. So we form communities of practice that span functions. We have our ESG board committees, which look at problems across dimensions, or which look at questions across dimensions. And we have our group excos, which are CEOs and function head bodies, where many of these things get discussed and deliberated on, right? And so there is this continuous flow of information. So we kind of do it in multiple ways. I hope I've answered your question.
Richa, would you like to go next?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we can get just short, brief answers, and then I think we'll...
Sure, Preeta. So I would agree to what Gaurav said. I think compliance do not define how we should do ESG or sustainability. And the kind of experience that I've had with previous organizations and current organization, I think reporting on any format is a outcome or an output, but what are the processes that have been in place in order to maintain an approach, a clear deployment plan, a commitment framework? I think there's a lot of pre-work to that, and then comes the reporting aspect, or the BRSR format comes into picture. And some of the organizations that we have on the panel have had those kind of journeys for a very, very long period of time. It takes a lot of effort and time to get the management buy-in, because sustainability is not going to give any ROI overnight. It has to be thought through properly, conceived very naturally, and then the delivery happens over a period of time. So I completely agree that this is something, compliance have been there for quite some time. It's been almost 10 years now. The BRR used to happen in 2013, and now the formats have changed, and now it's all well deployed for the 1,000 listed companies, and now the assurance has been made at a reasonable level for another set of companies. So it's getting stringent and stringent, but they don't define how we should progress or approach a sustainability journey. Yeah, that's what my addition to the point Gaurav made.
I just want to answer this a little differently. I've observed in Bangalore city, when you drive around, you have traffic lights at intersections. And everybody driving in Bangalore is looking to see how they can beat the traffic light. Most times they're successful because they're not looking at the light. They're looking to see if there's a cop regulating the light. Yeah. So the reason I'm talking about this, imagine a country you have lights, but you need a policeman to enforce the lights. And I'm looking at regulatory overreach into responsible business practices like that traffic policeman. Because if you just leave it to the goodness of people to run responsible businesses, God knows, the world might end faster than we imagine. Yeah? So you need some regulatory frameworks to hang your coat on, get your information. But even if somebody is doing it as a tick-off, the caution is, imagine, ask yourself, where is the regulator going with all this disclosure that I'm making? In a couple of years, the regulator will be able to see trends of information emerging from your company. The regulator is moving towards a grading, scoring mechanism. Can you see? And it's going to be a huge blow that you have information in the public domain that you haven't thought through really. And suddenly trends are being plotted using that information. Then you're being ranked and rated. And you think, oh my God, I should have been a lot more careful. I should have been more circumspect. Processes should have been stronger. So I think organizations will journey through this. And as organizations begin to recognize why they're being asked to do what they're being asked to, they will be careful. They will be a lot more thoughtful and responsible about the way they address some of this. So don't sell it anymore. It'll happen. Okay. Don't sell it. Even if they're faking it, let them. In 2 years' time, you'll realize the fake will be called out. And that's a very bad blow to recover from.
I think I completely agree with you, Aruna. I have one question that I wanted to ask you, especially on the brand. Being an e-com platform, right? From the sustainability angle, do you make a difference between the green brands and the not? And are you seeing customer changes happening?
So I'll just quickly respond to a couple of questions also that were there. So the way we are looking at our sustainability journey is in 3 buckets, right? So one is our own operations, which is where our energy commitments to become using all our energy needs through renewable sources coming in by 2030. We have also committed to ensure that all the delivery vehicles that are used to deliver Flipkart products use are electric vehicles by 2030. And both of them put together kind of ensures that, that the question that somebody had raised here gets answered, that it's not just pollution in the cities that is being tackled, but also the source of that energy is becoming greener. And then you have the plastic removal from our supply chains, etc. So that is just our own operations. And then we also look at our sustainability journey from a upstream engagement with the brands and the downstream engagement with our consumers, right? And both of them go hand in hand. Interestingly, of course, as COVID was spreading, there was a lot more awareness in the consumers towards at least the consumption related products, right? So the products that you're eating, the products that you're applying on your skin, there's a lot more sensitivity towards how are these products being made and how are they going to be consumed. And of course, the trigger point was essentially our own health. And I think it is very, very encouraging to see it spill over to the planet and environment as well, right? So there is an increased awareness and demand from the consumers for products that are good for the consumption, and incidentally, they are also good for the environment and the planet, right? So, what we are essentially doing is that passing these consumer signals to the brands to encourage them to come up with more and more sustainable products that can be sold across the supply chains, and then also, avoid greenwashing as much as possible, because we are also a platform which has millions and millions of products listed, right? How do you then communicate what is a verifiable claim and what is not is a work in progress, of course. So thankfully there are a lot of certifications that are coming up. A lot of brands are also going for those certificates, be it vegan, be it toxic free, be it plastic positive. A lot of these claims are there, and the brands are also coming forward and disclosing them on the platform itself to say that, hey, here is the certificate to say that I am actually vegan or I'm actually organic and I'm not just faking it, right? And then our responsibility is how to communicate that to the consumer in a format that the consumer can consume it in the best way possible. And we launched this initiative called Flipkart Green last year, where we are highlighting the brands which have these verifiable certificates that can be shown to the consumer to say that that it's not just a claim, it's a verified claim. And I think that transparency to the consumer is very, very critical, and transparency of not just the claim, also about whether it is a verified claim or not.
So I think we'll end up, but one last question to all of you, since you all are the ESG sustainability health for very large organizations. So I understand the vision from the top, but what is your vision for your individual organizations in the next, let's say, 1 year? And we can start from Gupta.
Never ask a sustainability professional for a 1-year vision. For us, we've now entered a stage where implementation matters, right? We've done the hard yards on setting the targets, on aligning everybody. Now it's time to deliver. And delivery happens when each of our businesses incorporates the 9 aims that we're talking about into their business planning process. The right budgets are allocated, and those budgets are allocated to projects that are helping move the needle, not just for the ESG portion, but for the overall business as well. So for my 1-year vision, or what I would like to see an outcome on, is that the delivery starts happening. And that will only be a positive reinforcement, because if the delivery fails, then we can keep talking about this, but it's not going to generate any excitement. So that's our 1-year vision.
Sure. So it's a little different from what Gaurav said. So we've started our very impactful and ambitious Schneider Sustainability Impact Program way back in 2005. With a 15-year-long journey, the targets have mostly been achieved, and we are here to achieve net zero by 2030. That's the kind of targets we have for the next 5 years. So the targets have been set. We've been doing well. We are sharing our updates through the sustainability barometer, well on all the platforms and all. We are there on most of the rating agencies and indices, as you would have known. But not to forget that this is not just our journey. The needle for us is to now make it more and more inclusive for our stakeholders. So right now, when I spoke about the previous question, where we are taking our employees all along in the understanding of sustainability. So we are opening up listening mechanisms and taking all along the sustainability journey and transition. We are opening up to help our suppliers achieve net zero. So right now we have empaneled top 1,000 suppliers to enable their journeys also towards sustainability. We are deploying some community development programs which have technology and digital inclusion, so that the communities are also built and managed and I would say made knowledgeable on this kind of transition. The investors and all are anyways empaneled, and they know the progress that we've been making. But getting all along in the business transition, in the sustainability growth path, is the needle of change that we are working on right now for the next 1 year.
Echo with what Gaurav said, movement of metrics implementation. So all kinds of metrics, moving them ahead. on a year-on-year basis. That's one priority. And the second priority is to Richa's point, in the stakeholder ecosystem, how do you get them along in the journey? But specifically working more closely with the government to improve policies in different areas. Those would be priorities.
To avoid the panic of the annual goal setting exercise for ESG, we thought we were being smart and we created the ESG Vision 2030, which was broken up into annual goals. So thankfully, we don't have that panic. But there are 4 exciting areas that are occupying all my attention now. One of them is, how do you amplify the success of your results in being carbon neutral or moving towards net zero and use these with your clients? So I think in our industry, how can you leverage technology to enable the carbon neutrality and net zero journeys of your clients to create a much bigger impact? The second big area of focus, obviously, we recognize companies like Infosys are accelerating the use of technology by the common man. And so we have a duty to ensure that everybody participates in this progress. We've launched a massive, completely free learning platform called Infosys Springboard with a target of reaching 10 million plus learners by 2025. We've overshot that target. So I think the next is to create a more ambitious target to make this learning available free of cost all over the world. The third big area, India has this anomaly of 48% women and only 18% contribution, contributing to only 80% of the GDP. How do you fix the anomaly? How do you accelerate participation of women in the economic progress of the country? If you study the demography of India, women are in every field you can possibly think of. You look at education, almost 50%, every batch, every discipline, graduation, post-graduation, doctoral studies has women. Then where on earth are they? And I think India needs to correct that urgently. Another big area is, of course, the inclusion of persons with disability, streaming persons with disability to live lives of economic independence and dignity. And of course, the fourth area is the one that we're partnering with Dun & Bradstreet on, is how do we ensure that our supply chain is ESG compliant? So these are 4 big areas that are more prioritized for this year.
This is always the most difficult part, right? Because most of everyone has said almost everything that is to be said, right? But just quickly summarizing our 1 year ambition. One is, of course, to deliver on the goals that we have taken. So while we have commitments for 2030, how do you achieve some of those before time, and the annual targets need to be met. But I think for an organization like ours, the broader journey or the broader impact that we can create is we have hundreds of millions of consumers in the country. We have thousands of suppliers, brands, logistics suppliers, packaging suppliers, etc. across the country. How do you engage with them, and how do you start nudging them onto this journey? Because that's where I think, apart from our own goals and imprints, how does the broader ecosystem start moving with us on that journey becomes extremely critical. So we do have a lot of pilots planned up on that, and hoping that some of them do become the goals for the subsequent year.
Thank you so much. I think this is really interesting and heartening, the kind of goals and the difference that you're making, not only the companies, but the country. And with that, over to you, Nina.
Thank you so much, Preeta. It was really very interesting. I was sitting backstage and just listening intently. And I must say that, the discussion points truly touched upon the ESG and sustainability, that ESG and sustainability now are more important than ever for any organization. And needless to say, what is good for the society is also good for the portfolio. And without further ado, I would request Preeta to please hand over the mementos to our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.